Rodney, for me to accept the existence of God, particularly as told by the Judeo-Christian religions, I have to accept a constellation of things. That God created the world, that God intervenes in the world, the course of history, human affairs, miracles. Irrespective of the truth or falsity of that, I want to know, how could God do that, knowing how the physical world works? What's the mechanism? Is that even conceivable?
Well, I think it is. I think we've moved away over the last 100 years or so from a mechanistic view of the way the world works. It looked as though the universe was completely deterministic. If you go back to Laplace, he talked about knowing the positions and velocities of every particle in the universe at one time, and then that would tell you it's the whole future and past of the universe. We've moved away from that, and there are two particular areas in modern science which I think help us to move away, in having moved away. One is quantum theory, which is indeterministic, and another is chaos theory, which, while theoretically deterministic, is inherently unpredictable. So chaotic systems cannot be predicted. The system is, to all intents and purposes, indeterministic as well, even though the equations are strictly deterministic.
So this gives God an opportunity to fiddle in there at these so-called causal joints to play with the system?
Well, it means that there may be opportunities for God to interact with the world through processes which are not causally determined from within the processes of nature. So you have laws, but these are no longer deterministic.
What about issues like the conservation of energy?
Sure.
Which in a closed system, and the universe is a closed system, however big it is, can you add energy to a system by fiddling with these situations?
That's an interesting technical question, which is isn't that easy to answer. But I think basically, if you're talking about you're talking about God patterning or creating patterns, and not necessarily having to add energy. But if things can go in different ways, then it seems to me that it's plausible that.
So if they could go in different ways in any event, God can kind of blow on it or something, and not really, and just try to choose one or the other of the events that would have occurred anyway. Is that the thinking?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. I mean, what I'm saying is that these are.
I don't think that's right.
No. Well,
I don't.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that when we're in this realm, we are speculating somewhat, but I think what is being opened up here is opportunities, maybe, for the way God might interact. I mean, God may interact through the human mind.
Okay, well, then how would that happen? How would God do that? I mean, prayer is a critical part of virtually every major religion.
It is.
And if that prayer has any sort of reality, then there has to be some interaction.
That's right.
Maybe
God gives me pictures or visions or, okay, he's using, when he does so, there will be neural correlates of what's going on and so on. But that seems to me not to detract at all from the idea that a person is having a real religious experience. I mean, there are neural correlates of my experiencing this conversation with you right now. Sure. So if someone experiencing God, or God perhaps guiding some person, people sometimes get direct thoughts.
So God would not have to deal with a soul, whether or not you have one, but God could deal directly with neural activities if we are just purely embodied creatures.
Well, I think that's one possibility. And now you've raised the issue of the soul, which is another very complex area. Right. Do we possess an immaterial soul, or are we? Is the soul some sort of manifestation of the complexity of our brains? I frankly don't know the answer to that. In some ways, I think it would make it easier for God to interact if we had these immaterial souls, and it would solve one or two other problems, like theologically, that is. And indeed, I think philosophically there are difficult problems about a purely physical material stuff being the only stuff there is.
But in terms of God intervening,
yeah.
it really,
He could do it either
way.
way. Exactly, he could do it either way.
Not uncomfortable with that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And how about some of these miracles which would seem to defy physical law? Is that something that you subscribe to?
Well, I do subscribe to God working through miracles. I mean, normally I would see him working through the laws of nature. I think he works in three ways. Through the laws of nature, which he, after all, constructed. Providentially, through these kinds of ways, possibly through chaos theory interacting with chaotic systems by inputting information, or maybe quantum theoretically, I don't know. But also, on occasion, through miracle. What science does is discover the normal regularities of the way God works, maybe one could even put it, the way the world works. But miracles, it seems to me, are by no means excluded from science. I mean, you can't have random things happening all the time, otherwise you couldn't do science at all. I mean, not that miracles are random things, but you see what I mean? You couldn't have sort of unusual things happening. There's a certain predictability, and science is uncovering that. But it seems to me there's room for miracles, and the supreme one for the Christian is the miracle of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which I think there is very strong evidence from testimony, from witnesses, and that's how I would see that's how I would see the validation of such a miracle.
And the mechanism by which God may do such miracles goes back to working, it can't just be through natural process. There has to be some change in the regularity, right?
Sure, but certainly for the resurrection. I think there may well be miracles which are brought about, say, the crossing of the Red Sea or something, which could be brought about through natural processes. I mean, you do get strong winds that could conceivably drive water aside and so on. But certainly for the resurrection, and that would be a miracle that's taking us beyond the physics of the world as we know it.
So how critical in terms of your ultimate theology is understanding how God interacts in the world? That God does interact has to be fundamental.
Exactly.
But to see it as a possibility in terms of a mechanism, how important is that?
Not very. I think I'm a bit agnostic about the various things I've described, which I think are opening up possibilities, and I do think it's helping us move away from the strictly mechanistic view that we had from the time of Newton. I think that is a good move. But whether when we come to talk in any detail about these things, we're really catching how God works, I'm not sure.